Hello, welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we'll be talking about the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, released in 1994 in Japan and in 1997 in English. As always, there will be spoilers. This is the big one for some people. There's reference to this book in other media, it often comes up in polls about what's the best Murakami book, and I think it has to do a lot with context. By the time this book was published, we had the Rat Trilogy and Dance Dance Dance, which was a great starting point for Murakami's career, Tokyo Blues, which was short and realistic but an international superhit, Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World, which was good but kinda divisive, The Elephant Vanished, again, I love it but it was divisive, and South of the Border, West of the Sun, which felt like a successor, like a spiritual successor to Tokyo Blues. And then the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle shows up. It's a much longer book, it's more heavily researched, dives head-on into the magical realism that will later characterize the author. It's much more philosophical and metaphysical while staying very grounded. It's also the perfect mix between a novel and a short story compilation because it tells the stories of many characters that seem unrelated, but spoilers, all of these stories will come together in the end of the book in a perfectly organic yet unexpected way. So, for example, if you have read Tokyo Blues, you know it's a near perfect book, and you could imagine it being in the same universe. But the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles opens so many more doors. It almost feels like a transition from black and white to color. It has more tools at its disposal, it has more colors in its palette, it has a wider range of sounds and smells, even a wider range of emotions. To finish this introduction, I will say this is not my favorite Murakami book, because this might not be the pinnacle of entertainment. The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle maybe lacks a little bit of excitement or a spectacle, but still, this is a literary achievement. You might learn from this book. You might fall in love with its characters. You might hate some of its characters. You might have your mind blown by the plot twist. And also, it's a very human book. There are characters that have gone through actual real life wars, and it has affected them in a very real way. There's a character who is in a situation where he thinks he might die, and his last thoughts are about someone he didn't expect to be thinking about in his dying moments. That's very realistic. That's very organic. Like, I believe that. If you have read the plot summary of this book, you have probably been spoiled the fact that the main character's wife disappears. When you read the book, this almost feels like a spoiler because it happens much more later than what you will expect in the story. Unlike many Murakami's books where people who disappear just go to a place where they can't come back from, in this book, the wife goes to an actual place. She isn't like lost in other dimension, she's very much alive and gone for a reason. And our main character feels like if he understands that reason, he might be able to get her back. Also, there's a psychic, the psychic's sister. There's a teenager that works for a wig company whose name is Mei Kasahara. There's a fashion designer and her mute son. There's a street musician. There's an ex-soldier, a veterinarian, the main character's politician brother-in-law, and of course the main character Toru Okada and his wife Kumiko Okada. It will be extremely confusing to try to summarize the plot, because it will involve going through each of these characters' stories and backstories. But the book, being kinda slow, also gives you some time to process all of this information, process all of these stories and backstories, and ultimately the characters are pretty memorable. Again, this feels like a mix between a short story compilation and a novel. Many of those stories happened concurrently. Yet, when you're reading it, the plot is not hard to follow at all, mostly because it's not all over the place. It's pretty much centered around Toru trying to find Kumiko. Now we're gonna get into heavy spoiler territory, like end of the book spoilers. So finally, Toru understands that Kumiko left him because she knows that his brother, Kumiko's brother, he is a bad guy. He has done terrible things to both her and her sister, and she doesn't want to see him again, ever. But there's an election coming up, and that might be a big deal. He might become too powerful because he has a dangerous amount of followers, and his position may give him a platform to negatively influence all of these followers. So Kumiko understands that by separating herself from Toru, his brother, as part of her biological family, is going to give her a place to stay. So she does that to be close enough to his brother so she can wait for the best opportunity to kill him. That is what separates Toru from Kumiko, but there's also another thing. Toru is lazy, he's kinda depressed, is currently unemployed, he's not worried about his life, he's not trying to move forward, he stays away from trouble and avoids taking responsibility in any situation. Kumiko, on the other hand, has a job, is very proactive, and feels responsible for other people so much that she makes this whole plan to kill his own brother for the good of the general population, basically. And Toru's process to understand Kumiko's point of view and Kumiko's decision has to do with growing up and taking responsibility himself. Toru has probably the less complicated life out of all of the characters involved in the story. He doesn't have to work, he doesn't have to look for a job, he isn't sick, he doesn't have to take care of anyone. The biggest of his worries have to do with finding a missing cat, which he doesn't seem to be particularly worried about. And the disappearance of Kumiko moves him to action, and that movement makes his life start to move forward. As in real life, any force of opposition that we might encounter is what pushes us to be better, to become stronger, to be up to the task. And part of that is to heal and to embark in a process of self-discovery. This is a book that I will have loved to read earlier in my life, but I still think that at any age, it's great. You can get the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle pretty much anywhere where good books are sold. If you want to support this podcast, or you just like cool t-shirts, or maybe some coffee mugs or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find all of that and more, featuring the cover artwork for this episode, inspired of course by the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. There will be one design for each episode release of this podcast.